Questions?
Yes, in previous videos, talked about different aspects of Buddhism, and there are many different aspects of Buddhism, wide subject.
Yes.
You're familiar with Pema Chödrön,
Yes.
the teacher. And so her teachings on Bodhicitta, and my understanding is that that is a form of tenderness. Can you kind of go into that just a little bit as in practical experience? And so if you're in that and you are experiencing the world, to what degree does that tenderness become unbearable?
Good question. All right. So let me introduce Pema Chödrön to people who don't know that. Pema Chödrön is a Buddhist monk, and she's an extraordinary woman and an awakened woman. And she taught all her life, and I may still be teaching. And a book that I really recommend for people when things are going sideways, I mean, when you're down, because Pema's been down, and she knows the territory, is When Things Fall Apart. Beautiful title, and that book is highly recommended, When Things Fall Apart. Now, Pema Chödrön was a sensitive woman, as Buddhists tend to be, right? I mean, part of the evolution of consciousness means getting rid of the thick, dirty glasses that surround our senses, and in Toltec they'd call it heightened awareness. And so, in this state of heightened awareness, you're very, very sensitive, and because you're very sensitive, you perceive more, you sense more, you're more awake, you're more alive, but you're also more sensitive to the suffering that goes on in the world. And you're more open, your heart is wide open. And so, although, except for maybe a few tantric Buddhists, there's not a whole lot of focus on opening chakras or anything like that, there most certainly is a focus on opening the heart and exchanging self for others, which is a key construct in Christianity and Buddhism, and having compassion for others and for yourself. To which I may add, in Buddhism, having compassion for others doesn't make sense, because there is no other that is not yourself. And so having loving kindness has to be for all sentient beings, at least. And so there's no such thing as having compassion for the other. The other is yourself. And so I heard the Dalai Lama once in a teaching discuss this, that they're one and the same. And so with an open heart, with a tender heart, with a sensitive heart, one approaches the world. Now that can be heartbreaking, that can be devastating. And so that's why you need also the bodhi part, the wisdom, because with the sufficient insight, you can put things into perspective. And as I've said many times, or as my teacher said, something like that, I suppose, wisdom without compassion is useless. Compassion without wisdom is dangerous. It can be dangerous, because you can break your own heart, and you can go into a depression, for example. There's no reason for that, and that's another reason why having a guide, a teacher, a coach, or whatever you want to call it, a priest, or whatever you want to call a person, someone there to make sure that you don't go off the deep end. But you can go off the deep end in this path, and so that's kind of an intro. Now, what was your questions precisely?
I think what I'm looking at in this is there a point where you could have the experience of bodhicitta in daily life?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can and you should. But the wisdom component, so bodhicitta includes wisdom and compassion. And so the depth of your insight should match the depth of your heart, your sensitivity. And so, yeah, you really need both. But absolutely, that's what life is, right? Wisdom and compassion. Is that or is there something else you were looking for?
No, but well, that's good.
Now, in general, let's use English words or translations of Tibetan words or Sanskrit words or Hindi words or words in French or whatever, so more people can understand, because these are kind of specialized terms, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Or how would you translate bodhicitta?
I would translate it myself as sensitivity and wisdom, or tenderness and wisdom. That's how I would understand it.
Okay, and wisdom. Okay, good. And so when we say insight, we mean wisdom.
Yes.
And so the Buddhist, here we get into translation problems. So one might say, oh, I have insight, but I don't think a sane man would say, oh, I have wisdom, right? So that's one of the reasons why we have to be careful with the words. Wisdom.
Yeah, I would agree with it.
Okay, good. Follow up or another question?
Yes.
Follow up or which one? Follow up or question?
Okay. Follow up to a degree, yes. So a little bit in Krishnamurti's teachings.
Okay, good.
He teaches that the experiencer is the experience.
Can we make that into another question? I think it'd be a good one. May we?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. It's for editing, and a bunch of other reasons. Question.
In Krishnamurti's teachings, he states that the experience is the experiencer, and vice versa. So in that line of understanding, one dissolves into the actual experience without an experiencer being a separate entity. That would be a construct. That would be a persona. So, that would be a construct, a mental construct, but not accurate. Is that correct?
Well,
so if you're one with
let's talk. So he says, okay, actually, I think what he says is the observer is the observed, right?
Right.
He may say the other somewhere. I haven't never seen it. The experiencer is the experience. I haven't ever heard him say that. But the observer is the observed, I think, is closer to the thing. Now, this is foundational non-dual observation. This is Jesus saying, treat the other as yourself, not because he's being cute, not because he's being Pollyanna. It's because it's literally true. Treat the other as yourself. Treat your neighbor as yourself, or something like that. Or he also says, what you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. He's not speaking abstractly, he's speaking literally. And so when Krishnamurti says the observer is the observed, or the experiencer is the problem with the experiencer is that it implies an entity still present. And the same thing with observer. But the observer is the self drops out when you're seeing in the manner that Krishnamurti means. So there is no self to, as you were saying, there is no self to observe this. There's just
right.
Follow up.
So I want to kind of tie that together with the understanding of insight and heart and tenderness in what we were discussing about Pema Chödrön. Because that's kind of my understanding, that if you become, if you become the experience.
Do you have a passage of Pema Chödrön that you'd like to work from?
I didn't, because I was kind of going toward. I think I'm curious about quantum entanglement and water memory research in relation to these two things. Because
I think that's a mistake. I think you have to go and so Krishnamurti disavowed Buddhism, disavowed religion of any sort, disavowed any kind of weird language, disavowed all of that. Now we could hobble it together, but I don't think there's much yield in that. Pema Chödrön, I think, stands on her own, but she's very Buddhist woman. She's a nun, a Buddhist nun of the highest rank, right? And so I don't think that mashing them together makes a lot of sense. Now, at the higher levels, higher yogas tantra, or at the observer is the observed, then those questions don't exist. And so we need to decide what level we're going to do. But I think to mash these things together, and with regard to quantum entanglement, that's a well. Let's try it. You want to make a question out of, but one thing at a time. So this is one of the things I've learned doing these things on YouTube, is that if we get two questions mixed together, then it's very hard to. You spend all the time disentangling them and not answering either one properly. So let's take them one at a time. Is that all right?
So, yeah, I think that, yes, that's okay. I guess I don't necessarily see them as separate. Does that make sense?
It does, but in that case, you should explain it to me, because I do see them as very distinct constructs.
Okay.
So do you want to follow up, or you want a new question?
Yes, let's do a new question.
All right, here we go. Question.
Following a dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Psychologically, there is, and spiritually, there's discussion of ego dissolution. And
maybe.
But the goal in many of these practices seems to be to get rid of ego. However, there is a necessity for a functional ego unless you're completely enlightened, correct?
There's a function for the ego if you're completely enlightened. So no, it's not to get rid of the ego, it's to put the ego to the side. And it's not just the ego, it's the entire conceptual mind. Okay? And so again, now we have three questions in here. So let's go to the dark night of the soul. Who's dark night of the soul? And what do you mean by dark night of the soul? Because that's usually the ego having difficulties dealing with what's transpiring. But let's hear more. Who's dark night of the soul?
Can I experience, if I don't personally say it's mine? You know what I mean? Can I just describe an experience and request that information?
Perhaps. It depends on who's describing it.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, whose dark night of the soul are we referring to?
So from personhood, from ego and personhood,
mm-hmm.
there would be the experience of this, which would be absolutely devastating.
This experience of the dark night of the soul?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me what the dark night of the soul is, and how long does it last? And when did it occur? And there's a lot of questions, because that's a term that people use for all kinds of different things, right?
I apologize. I'm sorry.
Okay, and it may not be a night; it could be a year, right?
Right. Well, or several, correct?
Well, I hope not. But go ahead.
So if you have a dark night of the soul, where every single construct, every single thing that you have ever believed in your life disappears, falls out from under you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a devastation in that is beyond description, I personally would say, right? Now, at the bottom of that, at the bottom of all that absolute pain and misery, there's a place where you as an entity don't exist anymore. And you feel the trees, you understand intuitions, you have a different experience of what life means, what life is, and there's a place of bliss in the midst of the most horrific pain and at the underside of that. But it's almost like every want that you could have ever had has disappeared. There's no want. So if you went through a year or so of that or more, and then you went through a year or so of this absolute bliss, like Christ says, you must become as little children. And there's a place of that you really are like that. Like you're almost, it's like in Hinduism, they talk about the ones that are God, lost in God. I can't remember the name. And they just wander, right? So you come, but then the ego has to actually begin to refunction in the world, to kind of come back to the world. Now, most traditions teach that there's bliss that stays with you. Obviously, if you're enlightened, the bliss stays with you. My question would be, in those kind of experiences, what if after that bliss you go through agony? But it's a different agony than the dark night of the soul, because it's almost like feeling the pain of the entire world. Now, for me, I only know how to relate that to maybe like Bodhicitta, or the sensitivity that Krishnamurti talks about. But is that a place where you are stuck and not moving forward, or is that a natural part of that type of progression? So like in Christianity, there's a statement where Christ says, that he and the Father are in you, that you're, and I would take that to mean the same thing as, God, Guru, and self are one. So there is a place where you, as your name, your personality, isn't real to you anymore. But it's a construct that you use to function in the world. So I guess I'm just asking, is it uncommon for there to be a struggle after the bliss? Because that's kind of like you're chasing the bliss, then you realize, well, that ain't the answer either. You're not supposed to have the pain or the bliss. Like there's a different place where there's nothing. It's a really crazy void. And Pema Chödrön does talk about this a lot. So after the void, though, what if there's just this overwhelming heartache for the world? I'm assuming that is where you have to use detachment, and you have to practice stepping back and staying in the place of the witness. But I'm just kind of, what do you do? And so, and the reason it clicks, and I'm sorry because this is just chatting, right? But quantum entanglement explains that to me, and so does the water research they've done on water memory. Like you see how it could be that you could experience that pain in the world in a different way, perhaps. I don't know. It's like, and I know they're all separate in most people's minds, but I don't know that I feel that they are. But sometimes having all the things come together is somewhat confusing, because it just is nothing that you've ever lived. And it's like so different than a religious belief. And I think like some of it's like if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. It's like, because it's a construct. So any construct you have of God is a construct. And any understanding that you think you could have of God in that way is a construct. So like with the Tao, you just move with it. But I guess I'm like, how do you move with that pain other than just sitting in it? Like Buddhism teaches, like you sit in it, but is it still just the ego not wanting to break?
Yes.
Is that...
It's the ego.
Yes, it is.
It's all the ego. So you're having all these experiences. You, right? Well,
right.
You're headed the wrong direction. When the self drops out, then all of these problems disappear.
Right, but I don't still function in the world. Like that's the problem.
You can still function in the world without a mind, without your mind functioning the way it normally does. I mean, for example, have you ever had the experience where you drove to, like, say, Virginia on the freeway, and then you get there and you don't even know how you got there because you were thinking about something else, right?
A lot of my life, like that's beginning to be a constant kind of experience, and it's extremely terrifying.
What are you worried is going to happen? What's going to happen? What are you terrified of?
I think it's probably ego, because I think the intellectual part of me is used to understanding things, and suddenly
we're not going to understand it. Okay, that's again. So what's the question here? What's really the question? Have you discovered something with quantum mechanics and water memory and bodhicitta and Krishnamurti's sensitivity that like ties it all together, and is that valid? If you want it to be valid, you can, but see, there's still the you wanting that to be valid, right?
Well, no, I understand that part.
Okay.
I get that.
Which part? Okay, so repeat back to me. What did I just say?
You're saying there's still a you, there's still a persona, there's still a being.
And what is that you doing? What is that you doing right now?
Well, the mind is working to understand.
But no, I didn't ask about the mind. I asked you. What are you doing?
Well, the problem is not.
What's the problem?
My experience of not being a you doesn't seem to fit with a lot of what.
Why is that a problem?
Well, that's the part I guess I don't. Because that's where you really have to trust your path, correct?
Is it your path?
Well, if you were to become one with the Tao, you're not there. But there's still an awareness that
What do you mean you're not there if you're one with the Tao? Where did you get that idea?
Well, I mean, persona wouldn't be there. But there's still an awareness of that experience, of some type of change from what had been normal life, right?
I'm not quite sure I'm following you here. To accord with the way does not require you to go, full board monk or nun. Now, if you want to go live in a cave like Pema Chödrön, if you want to move to Nova Scotia and live in the hills by yourself, then, you can do whatever you like. But if you want to be in the world also, if you want to be in the world but not of the world, then there's a lot of Christian teachings on that. And there's there's many teachings on that. There's nothing that's not an esoteric teaching. That's a very practical one. I don't understand what the problem is. Help me. What is the problem, really?
Well, in some ways there is no problem, but
yeah, right, exactly. There is no problem. The ego makes the problems in order to hold itself reified, to make itself real, to maintain itself. It creates these intellectual puzzles and these wanting to put things together like this. And of course, people do this, but it's not really people doing this. It's the ego doing this. It's that part of the mind which does not want to let go. And so it creates conundrums, problems where there are no problems. So follow-up would be as a bodhisattva versus a stone Buddha. So like you're saying, yes, you don't have to go to a monastery, correct? A bodhisattva versus what?
Like a stone Buddha.
A stone? What's a stone Buddha?
There are discussions about, like, there's the bodhisattva that comes back to the world to help awaken it. And then there are the Buddhas that go off and they do, go to a monastery. They do go off into, like in Hinduism, they go off into the woods. Like,
really? Where did you get that idea that Buddhists go off into the woods?
Well, if you look at the change of life in Hinduism around
what are we talking about? Hinduism now? Are we talking about Buddhism? You're moving too fast here. Slow down. Just slow down. Now, you used another word that people are not going to understand. You said something about. Okay, first of all, for folks, bodhisattva means enlightening being. All right, it's a being that's here to enlighten. All right, now and then. Why are you mixing this with Hinduism? It's complicated enough for folks as it is. Can you tell us why you?
I apologize.
Okay.
I was trying to explain the stone Buddha. I guess my understanding of that
stone 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 Buddha.
Yeah.
Like stone.
Yeah.
Are you who's using these terms? Stone Buddha.
I would have to look back on that one.
Yeah, we have to find out because it's very confusing as it is, right, for folks. Some people have never been exposed to Buddhism. And so we got to be careful. So stone Buddha, I've never heard that phrase in my life, and I've been studying it all my life. And
so let's go back.
Go ahead.
Maybe I can go to Christianity and make sense in that. So in Christianity, you have people that feel they are called to stay in the world and they live a normal kind of life, and they are doing Christianity. That is where their belief system lies.
Yeah.
You have people, Thomas Merton and different ones, that go to monasteries and they believe that is their route.
And take a bath with a toaster.
Yeah.
All right, that's what happened to Thomas Merton. He was traipsing around with the Tibetans up in the mountains, and he falls into the bathtub, or the toaster falls in with him, or whatever. So So we could talk about Tibetans, or we could talk about Christianity. But when you start mixing them together, you get into bathtubs with toasters, and it's neither pretty nor good. I think we have to, if we're going to focus on a tradition, we need to focus on that tradition for now, and then later, once we're understood that at its very, very core, its essence, not at the level of vocabulary, not at the level of practices, not at the level of proverbs, etc. These things have a unity, right? But if we get lost up in all the books we've read, then it will be here for a lifetime and never know no truth. So let's try. Try again, but with a simpler question, okay? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. Question.
How would one following a Buddhist tradition find understanding as to whether their path involved practicing Buddhism, living in the world, daily activity, versus going into seclusion as a monk or a monastery type of situation?
Good question.
So
Good question. Good question. Okay, a person of what age?
A person in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah. Okay, so it's very different. That question is very different for someone in their 50s or 60s than it is for someone in their 20s, right? Because it's very important that you have to be able to chop wood and carry water. You need to have a job before you talk about any of this. And I notice that a lot of the teachers out there, especially in the East, they'll take on students who haven't grown up enough to even make their way in the world. And that's a mistake. You shouldn't be studying esoteria until you have a means of supporting yourself, of providing something to other people in return for food or for a roof. And so, good. So now we're talking about people after middle age, and they want to know whether they should go into basically a monastic type of life, or they should continue to like try and scratch their way through this very difficult world, especially here in the West. Well, we used to have an answer for this, very clear, and it was monasteries, nunneries, and places where people could go in retreat and stay there and provide services to our culture, to our society, make things that people wanted to support themselves, and pray and meditate and contemplate and live a very peaceful life in isolation. It was beautiful. It's a beautiful institution. I believe now, though, that there's not those availabilities as much as there used to be. I know there's not as much as there used to be, but the need is greater. There's more and more single people out there as they're getting older, and they're wondering, well, what should I do with my life? I guess can't be my whole life just trying to, have enough food to eat and a roof and work at Walmart every day, for example. I'm not referring to you at all, obviously, but the kind of just work-a-day work, and inside I'm dying, right? So they think about, well, wait a minute, maybe I could go to a monastery, not to a cave. Caves are not good basically for anybody, and I suspect that in Tibet, the people that went into caves were not the healthiest people up here, right? I mean, for periods of time, maybe for 3 years or something like that, but not for a lifetime. And even if you went for 3 years, it would be for a specialized purpose, right? Maybe you're doing dream yoga, or you're doing you're doing what's it called? Tumi or something like that, where they're changing the energies of your body and heating things up and all that other stuff. It gets cold in Tibet. So I think the question is, should someone go for the monastic life or the life of a nun, or should someone stay out in the world? I don't know that there's much of an option in the West anymore. Do you want to refine your question in the follow-up?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think that in those cases, how would one know? I mean, we know the trickery of the mind, right? We know ego can just turn us and twist us in every direction. So if you are meditating and you are spending time in silence, and you are using other practices, how does one find a confidence in perhaps that inner voice, not being a self, like you wouldn't want to go to a monastery because you're running. You wouldn't want to go to something like that.
Very good point. Very good points. You don't want, right. So one of the first questions you say, am I trying to escape something that I can't deal with out here? Am I just trying to get away from men finally? Whew. Am I trying to Am I trying to I'm tired of working, 9 to 5, and I really want to, I just want to get out of here, and this is a way where I can, have support. But the thing is, where are you going to go? I mean, as a practical matter, where would one go? I don't know of any places. Do you? I mean, if you do, I'd like to know about them, because there aren't any places for women that I know of that have any chance at this age. They want you when you're younger. So as a practical matter, before you get to anything of that, what are the options? What are the options? Literally, what are the options? Can you help me with that? Or is it just a theoretical question at this point?
No, I'm aware of some monasteries, but I'm not.
For women?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I haven't researched female element in that.
Well, I think let's do that first, right? And then let's talk. Because if there's no options there, then it's academic. And also, you don't decide, and you don't have the confidence. That's not where it goes. It doesn't work that way, as you intuit, right? It's not the self or the ego or the desire to escape from this life, which can be very, very difficult, right? So first we got to understand what are the real options. Otherwise, we're just spinning in theory, and that's not good. This work, or the aspiration of this work, is to have very pragmatic, useful information for folks. And so if you can find any of that, please let me know. All right? That would be very, very helpful, because you're not alone. If we're talking about you, I don't want to talk about you as an individual, but there are many, many women out there who are desperate for a change. But go ahead.
Well, so you could live more secluded. Let me put it that way. So if you didn't necessarily, go to a monastery, you could choose a life that was more secluded. I do think that
you're going to do that anyway, right? There's hundreds of lonely women out there, hundreds of thousands, millions of lonely women who are living in seclusion. Well, they're in their little apartments, and they're sick. Some of them have chronic. Go ahead.
Well, don't you think if you're like sick of world and you're lonely, that's a running from. That's not an actual.
No, not necessarily a running from. No, that's the circumstance they found themselves in. Their husband died, or their husband left them, and their kids don't care, or they never had kids. There are millions of women like that. What are we going to do to help? What are we going to do to help them?
But wouldn't you differentiate that there are many women like that, but not necessarily on a spiritual path?
No, they get on the spiritual path. The older they get, the more spiritual they get. There's no question. They didn't have time for spirituality. They didn't have time for spirituality in their 20s or 30s, right? But now that they're in their 60s, let's say, they're getting spiritual real fast. Of course, right? Otherwise, their life has been, just a series of, of unhappy circumstances, right? Or things that didn't work out. This is a common story, more common than not. So how are we going to help these women?
Well, that would be where you stay in the world and you try to do something in the world, correct?
No, we could create a new monastery of a sort. For example, you could have a hospital, you could have a shelter, you could have a place where older women took care of unwed mothers, right? Or women who had been abused and have kids or something. There's 1,000 things that women, older, wiser, more mature women can do. And that's what's meant by being in the world, but not of the world. Serve the world, not to remove yourself from it. When you went to these monasteries, these people were working, and they were working for a good. And so I think that's a fantasy that you're going to make a decision between. Now look at Pema Chödrön. Let's use her as an example. What did she do? She set up an entire place for people, several of them. And that woman has suffered, and she knows that of which she speaks. And so use her as an example. Or what would Jesus say? So we got to get people. There's a lot of fantasy here in this Dharma world that you're going to be one or the other. You're going to be in the world or of the world, but you can't do both or whatever. Well, that's contrary to Sufist teaching. That's contrary to Buddhist teaching. That's contrary to Christian teaching. I don't even know who. Now, so maybe some of the Hindu, but I'm not an expert in Hinduism, so I don't know. But clearly, world is the others are yourself, and so the first preoccupation becomes, well, what am I going to do with these cells of mine that are suffering out there? And then your own particular wrapping around your own little ego, or one's own little ego, starts to dissolve. And it's through helping others that we find ourselves. I mean, our authentic, real self, I think. But I'm kind of biased because I see this all the time, and I've seen it all my life. So this is a very, very, very common problem. A huge, huge problem in our country. Let's just talk about the United States of America right now. Women getting older, and they've got no provisions for old age. That's a huge thing. So how can we help? Next question. I'm sorry if but it's a big, big deal. You're talking about a very, very important problem. Next question.
If in all those traditions, there are instances of people who have, for short periods of time, let's take it to a short period of time, not necessarily life, right? That do seek isolation, or that do seek communion with God in some way that's not necessarily social in the world. So again, my question in that would be, how does one find a clarity in that?
Okay, we got to be more concrete, because there are people who do that, but it doesn't work, right? And
right.
And they may write books because they've got the time and they're not doing anything else, and it feels good to write a book and put your name on it and say, oh, I wrote this book, and I'm just that, I'm da da da. But it doesn't work out, right? Now, I'm a psychiatrist, I used to be a psychiatrist, so I see the arc, okay? And so at the rainbow of ego, at the end is ego, right? So let's get concrete. Who are you talking about?
Well, I was trying to keep it general. So
no. Okay, those who know do not generalize. Those who generalize do not know. All right. So let's get down to business here, if that's okay with you. Okay. Forgive me for being like this, but I really have to I have to try and focus people on what actually works in this world and beyond this world.
You're fine. I understood you were going to be a hard teacher.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know about teacher. I don't call myself a teacher. But keep going. Let's keep going.
We should look at what Krishnamurti says about teachers.
He says, don't ever come close to them. Just stay as far away from him as you can. He says, don't trust a single word they say, and so do I. I say, don't take one of my beliefs. If you take any of my beliefs, then I've done something wrong. Krishnamurti is very, very clear about this. Do not trust my authority on anything. And if you've done that, you've violated everything about me, and you've, up in heaven, Krishnamurti's like, that Native American, when he sees the pollution and that tear rolls down his eye. That's what Krishnamurti, when he hears somebody adopting one of his beliefs.
No, in one of his discussions, he talks about that, teachers for like physics and science and such, and he explains that.
Okay, of course, that's different. Okay, I thought you meant spiritual teachers. Okay, go ahead.
No, but in that same discussion, he does talk about the fact that teachers and students are in some way interchangeable, that a teacher per se, if you're using that term, that there is no such thing, but that you're learning from each other, that each are, if you're pointing to something, there is technically no teacher, because you're just pointing to something. And if that other person grasps that and understand that, it's not that you taught them something, it's simply that you showed them something you saw, or that you pointed out something that was already true.
Very good point. Very good point. Now, what does he say about teachers? But they're not physics, not biology, whatever. What does he say? That's a good point, though. It's an extremely good point. Did he call himself a teacher? Did he say, I'm your teacher, you're my students? No, he never said anything like that, as you just pointed out. Right?
The way I understood that particular talk that he gave, we are all teachers and we're all students. I mean, you're always ideally learning from the other. Of course, the other is just the same as you. It's one. But I mean, so there is no authority for teaching, except in subjects like math or physics or something that is concrete like that. That was how I understood his talk.
I'd go back and first of all read every book he's got. It's not that many. There's like 4 of them, and most of them he didn't write. They're just collections of his distilled work. And then go to the Krishnamurti David Bohm dialogues And I think you get a better sense of how he approaches teaching, teachers, and the material, and students. So Krishnamurti, you know who David Bohm is?
Oh yeah, I've watched all of those.
Okay. So what was your conclusion? Oh,
I
what was David
understand.
Bohm's conclusion, I guess would be my question.
Well, Krishnamurti's a little bit difficult for me. I've watched him actually quite a few times, and I like Krishnamurti. I have great respect for him.
Mm-hmm. So
I
why?
think that what he points out is extremely simple in most ways, and that's probably why our mind struggles with it. The ego struggles with it. So simple.
I don't know how simple getting rid of time and space is. I don't think it's that simple. But okay. So let's get to pragmatic, okay? Because what's the question here? What are we trying to get to? How are we going to help people who are ourselves? How we do that? You ask about going off into seclusion. Right. Now, and I asked for an example, and you went to Krishnamurti, so let's get somebody else, because Krishnamurti certainly didn't go off into seclusion.
Okay,
all right?
I understand.
And neither did the Dalai Lama, right?
No, but...
Okay, and Mohammed and Jesus, yeah, they did, but it was for a very very specific part of their lives, right? And
well, yes.
Yeah, and so if you want to be Jesus, then be Jesus, and you shouldn't be talking to me on the internet. That's a whole different order of commitment. But so let's keep going. Give me an example.
So we spent your whole life spiritual and involved in study.
What? No.
Let's say years in Christianity, years studying other belief systems. So not in the case that this is like middle age, you wake up, because suddenly life's not good if you've had wealth or you've had what you needed. But if you've lived a life where you've had distinct faith, so let's go Christian. Let's say you've had a life where you've been extremely Christ-focused.
What does wealth have to do with it?
Well, because I think that, to me, it seems that sometimes people believe, like maybe spiritual escapism. It's like, I don't have this, I don't have that, and they think that spirituality, well, there's two things in America. Number one, they think it's like, spirituality is like Santa Claus, like you start doing all this stuff and you're just going to generate wealth. That's one, I think.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, that's The Secret, some crazy thing. But also there's marketers that are taking advantage of that, right? There's people who make money taking advantage of people like that. Okay, keep going. This is interesting.
Right, so
keep going.
There's that side of it. And then there's the side of it where it's kind of a spiritual escapism. It's like, oh, well, life sucks. I'm not married. I don't have this. I don't have that. I'm not making enough money. So let me go be godly, And so I don't think either of those things are true. I think they are ways that people try to survive, but I don't believe those are the motivating. I mean, pain and suffering will definitely take you there to spirituality.
Yes.
But I don't think that the mindset of this is the next answer, I mean, to me, that's antithetical of spirituality, But I think that it is easy to generalize, you're correct. And many people look at, I think self-help there. People have the impression that it's self-help. The stuff ain't really kind of hard to self-help. Because that would be about surrender, right? So really spirituality and the different belief systems at the core, they teach us surrender to something other. And ideally in that surrender, you become one with that other.
Which tradition teaches that?
Well, in Christianity, people
Okay, Christianity? Okay, good. All right, good. Christianity and Islam, good. So that's the answer. But what's the question?
Okay, so let me ask it this way. In Christianity, there is the version of Christianity in the mindset of emulating Christ, right? And so you would hold Christ up and you would go by Christ's precepts and you would believe this is the way to behave. So it's a practical way of behavior.
That is correct? Christianity. That's the only Christianity.
There is another side of Christianity, I would say, or another understanding of it, where to be one with Christ.
Same thing.
Well, behavior and unity are two different things.
No, they're not. Why do you say they're two different things?
Well, I think one can behave a certain way, and yet, then that goes back to what's in your heart. But I
Then there's
think
no
you can
unity
behave
if you're behaving in that. I don't know what you mean by certain way, but I have an idea. And if you're behaving in that certain way, then there's not unity, right?
right. So there's a difference between following behavior.
I think you're confusing religion and the religion of Christianity, which occurred after Christ's death by a couple hundred years at least, right? And I'm not sure Jesus would have liked a lot of the stuff that got put together by the Vatican councils or whatever the name of that organization was in the second century that hobbled this thing together. But yeah, all right, good. Thank you for reminding me. So, we're not talking about that. That's Catholicism, which is its own rich tradition and powerful tradition and long-lasting tradition. Probably the longest lasting organization in the history of the planet is the Catholic Church. So, respect. But are we talking about Christianity or are we talking about the religion?
Well, I think that, there is a difference. I agree 100%. And I do think I have a general attitude of respect for all faiths, all belief systems. I think that needs to be said straight out.
What if it hurt people?
So let's go modern day America, right? Let's do it that way, or modern day world.
Yeah, I'm only interested in things right now, here in the present, right now, here, now, that are right here, actionable.
Right. So in this space, in this time, there are quite a few people, that the mindset in Christianity, when we're talking about the difference between embodying Christ, or Christ embodying you actually, versus following a set of rules that people believe they're going to be saved by the rules. So Christ said this, and if you do this, you're going to heaven or whatever.
Treat your neighbor as yourself. Love one another. Okay, treat your neighbor as yourself. That's his commandment, right? Love each other as I have loved you. That's it. It's pretty simple. Now, what's the question?
Well, I think every one of those things depends on definitions.
Well, I don't. Well, I mean, what's the definition? Treat the people like I treated you, and treat them as you would yourself. If you want enlightenment for yourself, you would want enlightenment for other people. If you want health and good food and a roof over your head for yourself, you would want it for other people. The kingdom of God is within you, right? There's no reason to go outside.
But I don't know that Christians are necessarily looking for enlightenment.
Name some Christians, please. I mean, you can go back. Let's go back 150 years. Name some Christians, please.
Well, I can't do that. I would have to say that would be dependent on personal experience in churches and with Christians. And
all right. So they're rare. They're very rare. They're about as rare as Muslims, right? They're as rare as Muslims. So let's make sure what we're talking about here. Are we talking about the imitation, the husk, the show? Or are we talking about the real thing? Because here, what we want to talk about is the real thing. So because we would get lost in all this other comparing religions. I mean, you can do that forever. And that's not the focus here. So you want to talk about Christianity, real Christianity, or do we want to talk about religion and how many people aren't practicing or whatever? So I'd like to get down to a real question about either Christianity or Buddhism or Krishnamurti or something that where we're going to have some new understanding, not what we already know, but something new. Right?
Okay.
So do you have a question about any of those three?
Yes. So in Christianity, there's a passage in Corinthians about...
Question. I'm sorry I have to do that, but I have to come. Forgive me. Go ahead.
In Christianity, there's a passage in Corinthians about not causing your weaker brother to sin or to fall by your actions. Are you familiar with the passage?
No, that's Old Testament, right? But the Sufis have a similar say. It says they talk about giving a ladder to a thief, right? So go ahead. I don't need to know the passage. It's a Christian. Go ahead.
Corinthians is not Old Testament. Corinthians is Paul.
I'm sorry. For me, the Bible is two parts. There's the words of Jesus, and then there's the words of everybody else. And you're absolutely right. In my mind, though, I take the words of everybody else and I call that the Old Testament. I shouldn't do that. You're right. Thank you for that correction. That's a very good one. So let's hear what Paul has to say. Go ahead.
So Paul talks about the weaker brother, that to not let your own confidence in your spirituality or your relationship with Christ let you act in a way that damages a brother whose faith is weaker or whose understanding is weaker.
Yeah, that's why I don't listen to anybody but Jesus. All right, but go ahead.
So could we relate that then to Christ's words of, to take the plank out of your eye before you worry about the...
Yeah, but why not just go to Jesus Christ where he says it very straightforward, right? I mean, remember, Paul's a preacher, right? He's preaching. And he's trying to create a congregation, right? So why not just go directly to Jesus, and you put it beautifully, perfectly, gorgeously. Before you get all preoccupied with everybody else, get the thing out of your own eye, right? So
Yes,
so again, let's go to so what's the question though about Paul, the preacher?
Well, and I was using that because I felt like maybe using the weaker brother terminology would be more understandable for some people. But could we look at the difference between discernment and judgment?
Sure.
In that
What's the question though? What's the question?
Well, the question is, how do you make that decision?
Well, first I would just go to Jesus and bypass the whole thing. I wouldn't go to Paul as an authority. Paul's writing how much after the crucifixion? How well did Paul know Jesus? Paul is a zealot. Paul's just as he was a fanatic against Christians, now he's a fanatic for the new faith. And so I wouldn't go to Paul, frankly. Now, I know I'm going to get in a lot of trouble with all my Christian brothers and sisters, but hey, I'm going to just speak honestly. Why would you go to a secondary source? Have you ever heard of duck soup?
Okay, that's fine. So if we go to Christ where he says, take the plank out of your eye before you worry about the splinter in your brother's eye.
There you go. Boom. Right there.
Okay. Look at that, and let's assume that we could look at that and say, well, the reason that they're not taking the plank out of their eyes, they don't recognize it's there, correct?
Okay.
I mean, if you're brother instead of your, means you could be ignorant of the fact that you have that in your eye, that you have your own faults.
Okay.
Or it means...
Good. Now we're getting to the question. What's the question?
And not focus enough on yourself. So I'm curious as to how you interpret that, looking at discernment versus judgment, because look at the...
Okay, let's look up the words. Look. You have a dictionary there, or a computer or phone or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want me to look?
Look up the word discern.
It's going to come up pretty much soon, but...
Yeah, you could use, if Oxford comes up, that's a nice one.
I've got Oxford in front of me, so I'll look it up in it. You bear with me, because
Sure, that's good, that's fine.
I probably should have just done it on the phone. Okay, to discern is to recognize or find something out, for Oxford says. Number 2 is to see or hear someone or something with difficulty.
Okay. With difficulty?
Yeah, it says, go back to it. Yeah.
What about number 3?
I don't have a 3 in this.
All right. Well, let's just use this. To recognize or to hear or see.
Recognize or find something out.
All right.
See or hear someone or something with difficulty.
Oh, to hear or see someone or something. Okay. That's what was missing.
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's part's the critical part. Someone or something. All right, now judgment real quick.
Judgment
the ability to make considered decisions or form sensible opinions. Number 2 is an opinion or conclusion. And number 3, a decision of the law.
Okay, so form sensible opinions. Make sensible decisions. Okay?
Yeah, I think I'm going with number 2. The opinion or conclusion is.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Now, your question was, what was your question about discernment and judgment?
The question was, in looking at Christianity, or any other one of them, but the difference between discerning and judging, right?
One has to come before the other. The difference is not important, but the order is important. You don't make the judgment before the discernment. You make the discernment before the judgment. And that you have to have both. That's the wisdom and the compassion, by the way, or something like that. So to make a judgment without discernment is to risk falling flat on your face and hurting others. So these two are related to each other, but they're related temporally. Without discernment, you cannot make judgment.
Would you look at judgment as a form of harm? As
to the person making the judgment, yeah. As the Sufis say, appoint a man a judge, you kill him without a knife. Or as Jesus said, judge not, lest ye be judged. Right. So judgment is not something that wise people do. But you asked about it, so we thought we'd go down that road. But judgment is not something you want to do, in my estimation. But that's just me.
I feel like commonly that's a confusing thing for people: discernment and judgment. That it's easier to judge than it is to be discerning and look at the
right,
situation.
But we're not here to preach. We're here to learn, right? It is true. You're right. Okay, people judge all the time. Poor things. All they do is hurt themselves. Jesus was clear about it. Muhammad was clear about it. Everybody's clear about it. Judge not, lest ye be judged. There's a special place in hell for the lawyers. Remember that?
Yeah.
So judgment doesn't enter into Christianity much. I know that's going to sound heretical, but that's to the church, right? That's to the church.
To the church, I think that a lot of people.
Well, I don't want to talk about the church, though. I don't want to talk about the church. God bless them. They take care of a lot of people. A lot of simple-minded people too, and a lot of people who are very unfortunate, and they provide services and food and medicine and all kinds of other good things. So God bless them, right? But that's not what that's not what this is about here.
No, I'm thinking more individually. Like.
Which individual?
Well, I was saying that it seems like at times in the world, discernment and judgment get confused.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. Good thing. And I'm glad we clarified it, because judgment, as it's framed here, or as I'm framing it, has no place in this work, especially the judgment of others. My God, what do you need it for? Anyway, so any other questions before we stop? We've run over a bit. So any other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
There's not someone that you wanted to ask, but you didn't have time or something like that?
No, I guess just follow up on what we just talked about. I think that you don't want me mixing. I feel like ahimsa and do no harm and right understanding are kind of tied in with the same Christian teaching on judgment.
To do no harm is a whole other subject. And that requires wisdom beyond either one of our capacity to muster, I would guess. I don't know, I can't speak for you, but for me, right? So that is an aspiration at this level of earth, all right? Yeah. So judgment doesn't even come into the question at all. Because where do you get from that? With judgment, there's conflict. With judgment, there's separation. Right. Automatically, from the get-go. The minute you say judgment, there's separation and there's conflict. And so...
Well, I think there's...
Okay, go ahead.
I was thinking of it in more of a personal manner. I think that...
Which person? You?
Well, we can use me.
Well, otherwise we're just talking in abstractions, right? So we really got to talk concrete here again. Is there someone you know who's in danger of judgment or discernment or something like that? Or are you in danger of that?
I was simply looking to see that in judging others and yourself, is that not a form, not just that it's wrong, I'm not saying that, is it not a form of doing violence in a certain way to another and to yourself?
A Jesuit priest taught me once, and man, I hated him for it. He said, comparisons are odious. He goes, comparisons are odious. He said it, and I go, what? I'll give you the context some other time. But at any rate, I really resented him for saying that because I realized that he was right. And over the last, 20, 30 years of thinking about it, I realized that, yeah, he was right. Comparisons are odious. So yeah, I don't know who or what's being compared here, right? Even if it's internal, what good's it going to do? It's all relative, and the relative judgment or whatever. And I could be a little touchy here because I was raised, with all kinds of Christianity. I mean, that's my home base, is Christianity, and not just Catholicism, but also Protestantism, both, and not just that, but evangelicalism too. And so I have maybe I need to look at something in me that kind of goes when it comes to the judgment of others. All right, so I'll leave you with that, unless you have something else.
I just think it all plays to the question of truth, and I don't see
truth is not a question.
Belief specific. I don't see truth as one or another belief specific thing. That's all. In other words, I believe that there's a core truth that runs through all the different belief systems.
All right, but that's not a question. That's a statement.
Well, I know. I think I was just curious whether you felt that way too, or thought that was possible, or. So it's not that I'm intending.
So what's the question? What's the question? I know your opinion now. What's the question?
Do you believe that it's possible to find core truths in all the belief systems that are the same core truth?
No, not at all. You can't find it in any of the belief systems. So that's my answer. Okay?
Thank you.
You want to? Okay. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's fun, by the way. Enjoyed it. Good. Take care.